worked in the Pacific Northwest mostly, but also in the Galapagos and in a few other places. So it's been a good life. I'm happily retired now, and after teaching at Andrews for 30 years. And I taught at Union College, Southwestern, and Walla Walla, temporary on those places, except for Union. I was there 5 years, and then Andrews for 30 years. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm interested in paleobiology and have published some in that area, but most of my work has been in behavioral ecology, and Shondell and I have done a lot of work on that, so that's a little of my background. All right, so George McCready Price, scientific heretic, modern Moses, or prolific crank. At the end, maybe you can tell me which one you think best fits George McCready Price. Well, one day as a young adolescent, I was scanning book titles in my dad's office. He was a pastor. A blue-bound book caught my eye, Genesis Vindicated. As a kid, I was passionate about the natural world and its beginnings. I took the book home and was intrigued. Dad didn't mind me appropriating the book because his passion was the end of the world, not its beginning. Over the years, I picked up bits and pieces about George McCready Price, author of the book. But graduate courses in biology and paleontology, plus lots of field work, made me realize I could not agree with Price's views. Nonetheless, I found him to be a fascinating character. I taught biology at 3 Adventist colleges where Price taught, including 30 years at Andrews University in George McCready Price Hall, which is the biology building. I decided to write a biography of Price, which is now nearly completed. Here I am standing by the main entrance of Price Hall, George McCready Price Hall, including a plaque in his honor, and I'm here with the director of Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, Kirk Johnson, and he's a fellow Price aficionado who's kindly agreed to write forward for my book, so I'm looking forward to that. Today I'm going to share some of what I've learned about Price. My presentation is in 3 parts: Price's background, Price's views, and Price's legacy. Once I'm done, let's have a lively discussion. And you can't throw tomatoes at me from the screen, but at least you can express your opinions as well as you can, as much as you can. So let's look at Price and his impact on Adventism and beyond. First of all, Price's background. According to a 2019 Gallup poll, 40% of Americans believe the world was created in the last 10,000 years. This is the conclusion of scientific creationism, a perspective which assumes that flood geology squeezes Earth history into this short time frame. Contemporary flood geology is rooted in the work of Price, a deeply earnest person who was highly influential. Price died in 1963 at the age of 92, but even today his viewpoints spur millions of people in the Netherlands, Hong Kong, the United States, and the United States to visit full-scale replicas of Noah's Ark, replicas designed to convince visitors of the reality of the biblical deluge. Curiously, Price's name is hardly ever mentioned by today's creationists, even though their views reach back to concepts he promoted. Price enjoyed little scientific training and engaged in virtually no field or lab experience. These limitations, however, only fostered his self-image as a religious and scientific savior, blessed with an enlarged view of reality. His flood geology, based on what he called his divinely aided discoveries, denied the scientific consensus that rocks and fossils depict a lengthy and complicated Earth history. Price based his views on the writings of Ellen White, who in vision saw astonishing details of a recent creation and a devastating flood. Price used his impressive verbal skills and lawyerly arguments to disseminate White's claims, which he embellished with scientific jargon and carefully selected facts and quotations from the scientific literature. As a result, Price's flood geology became a central plank in the platform of today's scientific creationism. So who was this character who fancied himself creating a dark cloud, as he put it, over long-established views of geology? George McCready Price was born George Edmund Price on August 26, 1870, in Havelock, New Brunswick. George's father, George Marshall Price, was a farmer who raised a variety of crops and livestock. George's mother, Susan McCready Price, was a Seventh-day Baptist who came from a literary family. Susan's brother was for many years editor of the Telegraph Journal newspaper in the city of St. John, New Brunswick. Susan read from the English literary classics to George and his younger brother Charles as they were growing up. When George was 12, his father died. A year later, George and Charles tried to take care of the farm, but it was too much for them, and the farm folded. George began selling religious books to help the family make ends meet. About this time, one of George's uncles, George W. McCready, a civil engineer in nearby town of Moncton, converted to Adventism, and young George and his mother followed suit. George graduated from high school at age 15. Soon afterward, an Adventist literature evangelist, Amelia Nason, came to live with the Prices. George and Amelia fell in love and married. George was 17. Amelia was 29. They sold Adventist books together to make a living. Their main sales item was The Great Controversy by Ellen White. Within a few years, they produced the 3 children you see in the picture. George wanted to be a literary figure, so he traveled to the United States and enrolled in Battle Creek College, precursor of Andrews University. There he spent 2 years in the college's literary program. He earned 50 semester credits in Latin, Greek, English, rhetoric, English literature, Bible, and ecclesiastical history. Unfortunately, after 2 years at Battle Creek, he ran out of money and went back to selling books. This time, sales did not go well, and he had trouble supporting his wife and children. Amelia urged him to train as a teacher at the Provincial Normal School in New Brunswick, so that's what he did. After completing a year of teacher training there, he landed jobs at small country schools. From all counts, he was a good teacher. In 1898, Price secured a job as principal of the high school in the little town of Tracadie, New Brunswick. There he became friends with the director of the local leprosarium, Dr. Alfred Corbett Smith. When Smith learned that Price was religious, he revealed that he was an evolutionist and loaned Price 3 small books on evolution. Price quickly read through the books and returned them to Smith. The doctor asked Smith if he was now convinced about evolution. Price said no. So Smith asked Price, "Would you like to read more on the topic?" To Smith's surprise, Price said yes. Smith allowed Price to use his extensive library, which contained government publications on geology. Price spent many hours there teaching himself about earth science and taking copious notes. From childhood, Price said he always believed in the flood as an actual historical event. Nonetheless, he found the evolutionary perspectives advocated by the documents in Smith's library alluring. As he said, "I almost lost my way. I remember that on 3 distinct occasions while I was making my first investigations, determined to get the very bottom of the entire problem, I said to myself, well, there must be something to this claim that fossils do occur in a definite sequence, and thus there must be something to geological ages. 3 times this conviction swept over me, And it was only by some very providential discoveries that I began to see my way through the problem and to see how the actual facts of rocks and fossils, stripped of mere theories, splendidly refute this evolutionary theory of the invariable order of the fossils, which is the very backbone of evolutionary doctrine. This conclusion framed Price's thinking for the next 6 decades. Over the next few years, Price attempted to find his niche. He tried evangelism, but his high-pitched voice and pedantic delivery did not go over well. He colported, but he now made little income selling books. In 1902, he was hired to head up a new Adventist secondary school in Nova Scotia, but he exhibited little by way of management or financial skills and was let go after 2 years. Meanwhile, Price, who always wanted to become a writer, published his first book, Outlines of Modern Christianity and Modern Science. Here, based on the copious notes he'd taken in Dr. Smith's library, he outlined his beginning views on biblical geology, as he called it, and anti-evolutionism. These views he interpreted through the lens of a literalist interpretation of the Genesis flood story and of Ellen White's comments on this and the creation story. By August 1904, however, Price felt like an abysmal failure. His book was not a financial success. He was out of work, and he and his family were facing destitution. He decided to leave his family in New Brunswick and look for writing jobs in New York City. He said that if that didn't work out, he could sell his, quotes, watch, buy a revolver, and the world would be rid of another useless, good-for-nothing man. Were it not for his family, he said, I should certainly end the tragedy here and now. Price lived for most of the 1904-1905 year in New York's Greenwich Village, but writing jobs were difficult to find, and he was working only about a third of the time. He received no emotional support from the local SDA church, and he felt his eternal salvation was at stake when facing the temptations of the village, already known for its bohemian culture. The only positive aspect of his experience was learning to type using his boarding house bed as a desk. During the summer of 1905, and thanks to help from General Conference President A.G. Daniels, a financially and emotionally fragile George Price secured a temporary position driving a team of horses, hauling cement and gravel for the construction of the new GC headquarters building in Tacoma Park. But that autumn, he accepted a teaching offer at an Adventist school in Oakland, California. That's in 1906, after completing a year in Oakland, Price moved to Loma Linda University, Loma Linda, I should say, where he became a handyman at the church's new medical facility. He also taught chemistry, Latin, and Greek, and he tutored incoming nursing and medical students. His verbal skills were so impressive that he became known to students as the man who had swallowed the dictionary and remembered all of it. That same year, Price published his second book with a picture of himself on the cover, Illogical Geology, in which he offered $1,000 to anyone who could prove to him that, quotes, one kind of fossil is older than another. Well, that was pretty risky because $1,000 in 1906 was worth $36,000 today, an amount Price never could have raised. His offer was pure bluff. He took out a loan from the Southern California Conference to pay for the printing and distribution of 500 copies of the book, and it took him many years to pay off what he owed. One recipient of Illogical Geology was paleontologist David Starr Jordan, founding president of Stanford University. And he wrote to Price, I have read over your book called Illogical Geology. It is a very clever book, but you cannot expect any geologist to take it seriously. It is a sort of lawyer's plea based on scattering mistakes, omissions, and exceptions against general truths that anyone familiar with the facts in a general way cannot possibly dispute. It would be just as easy and just as convincing if one should take the facts of European history and attempt to show that all the various events were simultaneous. Price, apparently elated to receive even a negative response from someone as prominent as Jordan, wrote back, out of quite a number of adverse criticisms already received, yours is by far the most candid and thoughtful, and seems to indicate much the clearest grasp of the essence of my argument. In fact, Jordan had really said very little in his letter. 5 years later, pumped up by his literary achievements, Price lobbied the College of Medical Evangelists for a Bachelor of Arts degree based on his work at Battle Creek College, the Provincial Normal School, credits in German taken at Loma Linda, and his writing. CME awarded him the degree in 1912. Price lived for another half century. During his life, he taught at 8 Adventist schools and wrote 25 books and more than 700 articles for magazines such as the Sunday School Times, King's Business, Moody Monthly, Catholic World, and Bible Champion, as well as the SDA Signs of the Times, Review and Herald, and Ministry Magazine. Mathematics and science writer Martin Gardner called Price the last and the greatest of the anti-evolutionists. And a critic, Baptist theologian Bernard Ramm, wrote that the influence of Price is staggering. So what about Price's views? Well, during the 1925 Scopes monkey trial, defense attorney Clarence Darrow asked prosecuting attorney William Jennings Bryan, "Is there any scientist in the world you think much of?" Bryan responded, "I will give you George M. Price." Darrow scoffed that Price was a man that every scientist in this country knows is a mountebank and a pretender and not a geologist at all. In his first book, Price wrote that he made no pretensions of being a geologist. The more he wrote and taught, however, the more he donned a scientific mantle. His writings on geology, his use of scientific jargon, and his lawyerly disputations convinced readers that he was, in fact, a qualified earth scientist. Although he was well-read in geology, he was never formally trained in science, and he never practiced science by collecting, analyzing, and interpreting original data. Nevertheless, he backed up an assertion in 1917 with, "I speak now as a scientist," and he declared in 1921, "As a scientist, I have had occasion to consult rare works in geology." In fact, he was a fundamentalist apologist who wrote on topics that intersected with science. Price was unquestionably bright, and he grasped the basics of scientific information and methodology. He correctly noted that in science, inductive reasoning from data is carried out, he said, under the mentorship or superintendence of deduction. His so-called mother deduction was that God in his truth, a reference to his assumption of biblical literalism. It was this assumption that led him to reject well-established scientific interpretations, which he thought conflicted with his overarching deduction. Price took the Genesis, creation, and flood stories as scientific accounts of reality. With this background, let's look at some of Price's views and compare them with evidence from science. Price's main criticism of geological science was with the principle of fossil succession. This principle states that there is a predictable and orderly sequence of of fossil organisms wherever you look in the world, and that this sequence represents the succession of living things through time. By the time of Price, the principle of fossil succession had been established with good evidence for at least a century, but it was this principle that Price railed against. Price did not agree with the principle of fossil succession, but he did agree with the principle of superposition. As he described this principle quite correctly, when we find one rock bed laid down upon another, the lower one is evidently the older of the two. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? We can't lay down a piece of sediment and then have something slip underneath it, typically. This indeed is a good definition of this principle. But Price also said whether a layer was laid down 10 minutes earlier or 10 million years earlier, the rocks do not inform us, except we assume the succession of life and answer the question according to the fossils they contain. This would be true if we could not date the rocks by other methods, which today we can. To Price, all fossilized organisms had lived at the same time and were destroyed in the Genesis flood. He charged that geologists, quotes, assumed without a scintilla of evidence that there has been a succession of life upon the globe. He claimed geology does not, as commonly supposed, prove this succession, but only assumes it. It had been well documented, however, by William Smith, Georges Cuvier, and Charles Darwin long before Price's time that the deeper one examines levels of the geologic column, the less fossil organisms in those levels are like organisms living today. In other words, the percentage of extinct organisms gradually increases the deeper one looks in the rock record. This pattern implies a temporal process. Here are just two examples. Here we see that vertebrates, which are well represented in the fossil record and are often well preserved as fossils. Here we see that the deeper we go on the geologic column, the higher the percent of extinct types of vertebrates. Now that would be strange if in fact everything was created at the same time as Price indicated. The second example, ferns are also well represented as fossils. Once again, we see the same pattern, except by the top of the Cretaceous period, ferns are pretty much like those we have today. To emphasize his strong opposition, I didn't fix this slide, which I was planning to do, but let me just read it here. To emphasize his strong opposition to fossil succession, Price stated what he called his great law of conformable stratigraphic sequence. Any kind of fossiliferous beds, whatever, young or old, may be found occurring conformably on any other fossiliferous beds, older or younger. Unfortunately, this great law was pure nonsense, but he claimed it was by all odds the most important law ever formulated with reference to the order in which the strata occur. One of Price's former students, Harold W. Clark, who took Price's place at Pacific Union College, taught Price's view of fossil succession to his students for 16 years. But in the summer of 1938, one of his students took him for a month's survey of oil fields in Oklahoma and Texas. On this trip, Clark learned that oilmen located petroleum based on fossil succession. Clark, a Berkeley-trained scientist who valued empirical evidence, recognized the reality of fossil succession. At the same time, however, Clark remained, like Price, a staunch defender of worldwide flood. He had studied progressively higher zones in the Sierra Nevada mountains for his master's thesis at Berkeley. He now interpreted the geologic column as the result of the rising floodwaters, wiping out progressively higher life zones, which contained different communities of organisms. He called this his ecological zonation theory. In 1946, he published a book, The New Diluvialism, based on this interpretation. When the new diluvialism appeared, Price angrily reacted and printed a 30-page diatribe titled Theories of Satanic Origin, aimed squarely at Clark. Price mailed the pamphlet to Adventist church leaders and teachers. Unfortunately, Price and Clark never patched up their differences. But Clark's ecological zonation theory, or EZT as it was affectionately called, became the standard Adventist interpretation of the geologic column for several decades. Price was wrong about fossil succession. The order of the fossils in the geologic column is indeed predictable worldwide. Oil companies depend on this fact to find petroleum. To their credit, Adventist creationists have generally accepted fossil succession since the 1950s. The principle of superposition, which Price did accept, works only when the rock layers are undisturbed, but frequently they are disturbed. A common form of disturbance is called a thrust fault. So look at this diagram here. A thrust fault occurs when, as in the top here, there's a break in the rocks, which causes a mass of rocks to be pushed over another mass adjacent to it. So you have older rocks over younger rocks. In some cases, these movements occur over several kilometers. When this happens, the fossils within the rocks are moved out of sequence. And here are two examples. Here's one of the best I've ever seen. This shows you can see how those two lined up at one point, and now one adjacent area is now above the other area that it was adjacent to. And now we have older strata above younger strata. For scale here, you can look at the little yellow box that says younger, and there's a man standing under that. So this is a lot of rock right here. A second example here is from Maryland, the Johnston thrust, which is not as dramatic, but it extends for several kilometers. And here you see the contact point between these two layers of rock. Price refused to accept the reality of thrust faults. He apparently never went into the field to examine the obvious evidence for them, except at a distance. To admit their reality, he would have had to acknowledge that he'd been wrong about fossil succession. Clark, by contrast, fully endorsed these concepts and provided evidence for their occurrence in the new diluvialism. Price's views depended on a lack of order in the fossil record, but that's not what the data showed. He first decided what to believe and then tried to shoehorn evidence into that belief. That procedure, however, doesn't work long-term for individuals, businesses, churches, or governments. Although fossil succession and thrust faults received the lion's share of Price's attention, he denied other well-established concepts in science as well. One of these involved ice ages, or continental glaciation. According to this concept, large portions of the northern hemisphere were once covered by a mile or more thick buildup of ice, and this ice moved south, creating glacial features such as glacial grooves, glacial erratic boulders, long thin mounds of earth called eskers, huge mounds of rocks and dirt called moraines, ice depressions called kettles, and other distinct features. Here in southern Michigan, we see these sorts of characteristics. Price, concerned about the time implications of such a view, contended that Ice Age features were merely telltale signs of the Genesis flood and its aftermath. He was every bit as dismissive about an Ice Age as he was of fossil succession and thrust faults. As he put it, the theory of an Ice Age was invented as a sort of mental buffer and intellectual shock absorber to make the transition from the fossil world to the modern seem less abrupt and less catastrophic in nature. For 100 years, it has covered up the real facts of abruptness and strangeness in the change from the antediluvian world to the modern. The fable of an Ice Age was a clever addition to the other fable of a long series of successive ages. But with the pitiless exposure of the general theory of successive ages, which modern discoveries are now producing, we see the collapse also of the myth of the great ice caps a mile or more in depth, which it has been supposed once covered most of Europe and America. Now, please note that in this particular statement, Price's reference to the, quotes, pitiless exposure of the general theory of successive ages, which modern discoveries are now producing, was referenced not to any field discoveries, but to his own books. Virtually all geologists from the late 19th century through today have accepted the occurrence of ice ages. PUC's Harold Clark, for one, spent considerable time exploring glaciated terrain in Canada, New England, and other localities, many of which he pictured in his books. He wrote that during a hike to a rocky ledge on a Vermont farm, he, quotes, had not examined it more than 10 minutes before I was convinced that there was real glacial action. To a person like Clark, who enjoyed examining nature firsthand, the effects of massive quantities of ice in formerly glaciated regions were immensely obvious. He accepted evidence where it led, including things like fossil succession, thrust faults, and an ice age. Price, in his effort to uphold yet another contrarian view, again failed to look at the evidence for himself or to consider published information that falsified his assertions. Evidence for an ice age, actually multiple ice advances with warm interglacial periods, was both obvious and widely available during Price's time. And there were other denials. Price was a vitalist, meaning he believed that life consisted of more than physical and chemical interactions. He believed that God was the agent directly responsible for many things that happen in nature, including embryonic development and the hereditary process. One thing he wrote was, the common idea among biologists is that there must be some material carriers of heredity to affect the transmission of traits, and these carriers have been named genes. But, he claimed, there is no proof that such carriers actually exist. 12 years later, of course, in 1953, the molecular structure of the remarkable DNA molecule was determined, and the rest is history since that time. Price would have done well to have stated things with less certainty, but that was not his style. Mechanistic explanations for genetics and other biological processes have paid off handsomely, not only for the expansion of knowledge, but also for the role they play in fostering medical advances. Price also wrote on topics other than those directly related to science. For example, after the Bolshevik Revolution, he published 2 anti-socialism books the poisoning of democracy, and socialism in a test tube, or socialism exposed. Price was an ardent conservative and a strong individualist. He believed that socialism, including its involvement with organized labor, would restrict individual freedom and cause a breakdown of democracy and morals. He laid the blame for the rise of socialism on theological modernism in the German universities, and ultimately on the rise of evolutionism. Virtually every book Price wrote contained apocalyptic conclusions. He said that because of evolutionary thought, the world was in steep moral decline. He felt obligated to warn his fellow Christians, and especially his fellow Adventists, about the end of time. He didn't believe it was possible to lessen social evil through government action or social programs, because the downfall of civilization was inevitable. His primary concern was that individual Christians reject the evils of theological modernism, evolutionism, and socialism, and remain steadfast until Christ's second coming. He was particularly interested in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. His two final books were the greatest of the prophets, a verse-by-verse commentary on the book of Daniel, and a posthumously published volume, The Time of the End. Especially early in life, and this is surprising to anybody who's read any of Price's stuff, Price wrote poetry, which revealed some of his inner turmoil and commitments. I asked my friend Tom Wetchy, a poet himself with a PhD in literature, for an assessment of Price's poems. Tom later confessed that when I asked for him to do this, he anticipated thumbing through a stash of amateurish attempts, like looking through somebody's cherished album of family photos, no doubt rhyming and trotting, or perhaps uncertain and irregular meters. Instead, he was astonished, fascinated, and amused, and kept reading. Tom found Price's work remarkably cultured, poetic in an old-fashioned, bookish, scholarly sort of way, which made me feel a sudden affinity with this notoriously stodgy, close-minded biblical literalist. He said Price gets Miltonic blank verse. His overall assessment is that Price's poems are the work of a skillful versifier who is very familiar with the best literary models and interested in imitating and learning from them. Price, Tom judged, was a better poet than he was geologist, and he's written a perceptive article on Price's poetry for Spectrum, which is slated to appear later this year. Price also tried his hand at fiction, although he claimed that what he wrote wasn't fiction but allegory. He used his fiction to advance his views on geology and apocalypticism. He published two fictional works, some scientific stories and allegories, and The Man from Mars. Price, I'll have to say, though, was a better poet than a novelist. How about Price's legacy? Seventh-day Adventists self-identify as a peculiar people, and George McCready Price was one of the most peculiar of them all. Brilliant, articulate, hubristic, and idiosyncratic, no Adventist, other than the cornflakes inventing physician John Harvey Kellogg, exerted more influence both inside and outside the Adventist Church. Despite rejection by mainline scientists, Price pressed forward, completely confident in the righteousness of his cause. Men of science especially think they follow facts, he wrote, but their biased education and their innate theophobia, or the will to disbelieve, makes them not a whit different in this respect from ordinary mortals. He claimed that the Lord providentially led me to work out a scientific demonstration that these geological ages based on the fossils are artificial and untrue. He believed God had laid on him a burden to tell the world about his so-called discoveries. More than anything, he was an apologist. He said, for the old-fashioned Bible religion of primitive Christianity in all the best and purest ages of the Christian church. Like other fundamentalists of the time, Price fancied himself a strict Baconian, working only from objective facts, a big picture person who did not tinker, like most scientists, with the minutiae of the universe, a grand synthesizer blessed with an inspired view of reality. This heady self-image led him to claim that his universal flood concept cleared up, quotes, beautifully every major problem in the supposed conflict between modern science and modern Christianity. He said he was absolutely certain that the flood offers by far the best and the most reasonable explanation of the facts about the stratified rocks and their fossil contents. I believe in creation, he wrote, because I believe in a universal deluge. Price could be stubborn, combative, dismissive, thin-skinned, and vengeful. He possessed an obsessive-compulsive streak, common among academics and other successful people. He was a disaster when it came to administrative responsibilities. He exhibited little talent with financial matters. He expected everyone to believe what he believed. On the other hand, Price was unusually bright and absorbed information like a sponge. He was a superb writer and a much-loved teacher. He possessed the mental agility of a defense attorney. He was devout and hardworking. The cleverness and articulacy with which he argued his contrarian positions earned him praise from fellow fundamentalists and provided significant opportunities for the promulgation of his views. He inspired young people to take a deeper look at planet Earth. Some of these individuals became physicists, chemists, geologists, and biologists. They often developed their own interpretations, however, which were at odds with those of Price. Although he was an apologist for a literalistic interpretation of Scripture, the writings of Ellen White and his own idiosyncratic views of the past, Price claimed scientific objectivity. But his religious presuppositions, his so-called mother deductions, blinded him to physical reality. His avoidance of field experience only exacerbated his naivety. His lifelong opposition to the predictable order of fossils, thrust faulting, and continental glaciation, among other well-established concepts, compromised his standing amongst those who knew better. Price's influence peaked during the 1920s when fundamentalism was thriving. The previous decade had seen publication of an influential series of articles called The Fundamentals, from which fundamentalism got its name. Fundamentalism offered a sense of security to people groping for meaning, purpose, and certainty following the unrest created by the Bolshevik Revolution and the devastation of the Great War. After the 1920s and the 1930s, Price's views lost popularity. But in 1962, they were resuscitated with publication of a book called The Genesis Flood by fundamentalist Old Testament scholar John C. Whitcomb and fundamentalist hydrological engineer Henry Morris. Years later, Morris admitted that most of their book was, quotes, merely a survey of George McCready Price's arguments. Thanks to their book, however, Price's arguments were spreading like wildfire among evangelicals throughout the world and replacing the once popular gap creationism and day-age creationism. The Genesis Flood sold more than 300,000 copies and went through 49 printings by its 50th anniversary in 2011. After 64 years, it's still in print. The fact that 40% of Americans believe creation occurred within the recent past is directly or indirectly attributable to Price's views featured in this book. So is the fact that there are more than 200 young-age creationist organizations throughout the world, including the Adventist Church's Geoscience Research Institute and numerous creationist museums and theme parks. Young Age creationism and flood geology are now cash cows. Ken Ham's Answers in Genesis YouTube channel, for example, is estimated to be worth nearly $1 million. His Creation Museum, $27 million. Annual income from his Ark encounter, $21 million. And his personal network worth $55 million. Price could only have hoped for that kind of success. Just months before his 90th birthday, George McCready Price said, I don't look for any widespread return to creationism. But his pessimism was premature. More than 6 decades following his death, hundreds of evangelicals like Ken Ham used theme parks, multimedia, colorful exhibits, and a focus on children to broadcast Price's message of a worldwide flood and a recent creation to multiplied millions. Price would be stunned. So, I have some questions that you can or you may or may not be interested in looking at, but here they are. Price believed every word of Scripture was a scientific data point to be interpreted through today's scientific lens. What do you think? Price stated that that God led him to make his so-called discoveries, which even conservative Adventist scientists reject today. Price was sincere but wrong. In what ways do we use God's name in vain for the support of our own views? And finally, what are the implications of Price's story for the Seventh-day Adventist Church today? So, Lauren, I'll let you handle any questions that might be.
Yeah, a few hands are popping up. Let me start with a question. Could you say a little bit more about how modern scientific creationists handle the superposition of fossils in the
geological
fossil record?
Yeah. Well, some of them accept that. For example, I think all of the people at our own Geoscience Research Institute accept fossil succession. I think for the better informed creationists today accept that view. They use things like dynamic sorting in the water column to sort things out in sort of a sequence that we see in the fossil record to try to explain that kind of thing. Ecological zonation, of course, is still part of some of the views, although that has been in question now for quite a few years because it really is a problem in many ways. There are ways to get around, the creationists are using to get around that. But I think the most significant thing is this percent of extinct types as you go down through the geologic column. That's pretty serious, and we don't see creationists usually addressing that problem. But that is a very serious indictment of the view that everything was mixed up at once in the flood waters. It just doesn't seem to work.
Ecological zonation. Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's the view that the flood waters rose, and as they rose, they wiped out different levels of ecological zones. Anytime we go into a mountainous area and we drive up through the mountains, we first maybe enter the grasslands, and then we go up a little higher and we get to bush area, and then we go up a little higher and we get into ponderosa pines or yellow pines, go up a little further and we get broadleaf trees, and go up further and we start getting smaller and smaller vegetative items because there isn't enough moisture. And finally at the top, in very high zones, we don't have any vegetation or or plants or very few animals because it's too cold. So we see these zones today. And Clark's view was that, well, as the floodwaters rose, it would take out these zones in a sort of sequential way, and that organisms like plants and animals would have been wiped out in this progressive fashion. The problem, of course, is that, or one of the problems, there are actually quite a few. One of the problems is that why wouldn't we have found any mammals, for example, down in the Paleozoic, down in the lower levels of the geologic column? They're just not
There
there.
were
Yeah,
no mammals in the valley, only Dixonia and
exactly. And why don't we find dinosaurs above the Cretaceous? We don't.
mhm.
And on and on. So that's a serious problem, I think, for the ecological zonation theory. It was a nice, tidy theory, but then when you got in the field, it didn't seem to hang together very well. So,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah. Robert Ford, would you go ahead and there you go.
Yes. Hi, Bob.
How you doing, Jim?
Good to see
Appreciate
you
it.
again.
Yeah, I'm just looking out of my window at Mount Kenesawa in Zion National Park, and
Ooh,
I'm sure you've seen it. Right at the top of the mountain is some of the oldest fossils in the region, and below it are younger ones. Uh,
yes.
so, so there's very good evidence of that. But I just wanted to ask you, how does continental drift and all of those kinds of global geological movements affect what? Because I assume Price did not address that or think about that aspect of things.
No, continental drift didn't really become uh, popular even amongst scientists, even amongst geologists, until the late 1960s and 1970s. I remember when I took paleontology in the early 70s, continental drift was just barely mentioned. But today, you can't talk about, for example, biogeography, the distribution of organisms, without considering continental drift. It is such a powerful explanatory principle. Um, yeah, it Price didn't have access to that knowledge. Again, he died in 1963, and that was before continental drift became popular. Certainly, way back in about 1930, or even earlier than that, people had talked about the continents moving, especially Alfred Wegener, but most of the time those views were kind of laughed out of existence, and didn't really hold water for people. But then when the evidence of seafloor spreading and the magnetic orientation of the Earth and so on, the changes in that, when those became well known, continental drift just was a paradigm shift in geology and our understanding of the Earth. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Robert. We could use a few more questions and conversation here, but we have uh, Cliff Goldstein. Let me see. I need to get you to turn on. Cliff, you have to.
You're muted, I
Oh,
think.
Okay. All
yeah.
right. I
There
didn't
we
There
see
go.
you
that
go.
little thing. Okay.
Yeah, Cliff
All right.
Goldstein. Wow, we
Yeah.
finally meet
Hello.
face to face.
Yeah. Look,
Good to see you.
yeah, nice to see you too. I've never talked to you. Hey, Jack, there's Jack Owen. Maybe they could get A Today could get you to write a review of my biography, but that's another story. You
Oh,
would
I'd
be the
like to
one
see
I'd
that.
like to pick, Jack. But anyway, look, I guess look, when I say a young earth creationist, I mean I believe the 6 literal days life about 6,000 years ago. I'd have no problem that the universe was created billions of years ago. That's what I believe. But
Sure.
here's my question. I just don't understand. How could God who creates language, whose mind creates, mind is, I believe, God's mind came first, and then all the created world. Why would we get such an asinine story that if you that is absolutely not linked in any way at all to what long age evolutionary things happen? I mean, it's not even close to what happened. So all of history, we're left in total darkness, literal 6 days when it was really billions of years. Death is an enemy? No, death is the means. God did it. What common ancestry? No. I mean, different ancestry? No, common ancestry. God creates Adam, a full human being. And we could go on and on. I just don't understand. I even said to my wife this morning driving to church, look, even if I didn't want to take Genesis literally, the evolution, if there was any truth outside of microevolution, which nobody doubts, any truth, why was the Bible story so ridiculously wrong? Now, I know that in one of your books, or when we responded to your article, you said at one point, you said, well, the Bible's just the views of people who lived in that time believed. I remember distinctly because you
And
responded to my article.
Cliff,
Well,
I didn't actually, I didn't say it quite that way, but yeah,
well, but
go ahead.
it was the impression this was their understanding of the world. Well, why would
Yeah,
I give a rip about a bunch of farmers or people 2,500, 3,000 years ago? I'm going to guide my life by the view of a bunch of farmers or a bunch of Semitic sheep herders 3,000 years ago and let that be the guide for my life. I guess the bottom line I just don't understand is, and then I'll stop, why the Bible account, if what you're saying is true, if what modern science says is true, how the word of God could have it so completely wrong. And we had to wait till Charles Darwin to finally start straightening us out. I just have a problem with that. That's all. But anyway, I'm done.
I get it, Cliff. I get it. I mean, I understand. Listen, I was where you are when I was a kid, for sure. And it's been a torturous journey to actually come to terms with some of this stuff. And I don't have all the answers, that's for sure. But I think,
All right.
in fact, I have very few answers. I'm not very smart when it comes to this stuff. These are theological questions that I don't have a great understanding of. That's something Adventist theologians really need to wrestle with. How do we deal with this? Now, I can't simply ignore physical evidence. It's so clear, Cliff. It is so very clear to go in
If
the
you're
field
looking
and see
through a
this.
certain lens, I mean,
No,
are
not.
you not looking through a certain lens that you've been taught certain? Where did you get your graduate degree?
I got it at Andrews University and at Washington State University.
Okay, so you were getting it certainly at Washington State through. Let me ask you a question, and it's somewhat
Yeah,
rhetorical. Is it not? See, I come from the opposite. I said here a week or two ago, I was raised on evolution. I never
right.
questioned it. I never
Yep.
questioned it. And then I did, after I became an Adventist, or I first became a believer,
Mhm.
I started getting some creationist books, and I don't know, they could be as wacko as your evolution books out there. I
Sure.
don't take any of them that seriously. But it was the first time in my life, I was 24 years old, and I was confronted with, wow, no one denies there's the physical evidence, but it wasn't until I was 23, 24 that I was shown, hey, there are other ways to look at it. And it never entered my mind to anybody. So, I mean, you're looking at it through a certain set of assumptions, presuppositions. I am too. I admit it.
Yeah, we both are, right? That's
So I'm
right.
going to end up going with what simply seems the Bible says. So, okay. Anyway, I got my granddaughter here. Anyway,
Good.
say
Yeah,
all right.
I really appreciate your comments.
Anyway, I'm
And
going to have to go. But again, that's just what I struggle with.
yeah, no, that's
I
good,
just can
Glenn.
understand why
Hey,
would we have such an account that was so radically wrong in every single factor. I just have a problem with that.
I
And
don't
when you
think it's
got
wrong.
man-made science versus the Word of God, I don't make an attempt to harmonize it. I think I could deal with atheistic evolution easier than theistic evolution. Anyway, say hello, Noah. I do have to
Bye.
go. Okay. Okay. I'm really sorry. I would have loved to have stayed longer, but I've got to go.
Yeah,
Okay.
good.
Bye-bye. Thank
We
you.
should
Thank
talk
you. Enjoyed
sometime.
listening
It's
to you. I really did.
likewise.
Take
Let's
care.
get
Yeah.
together sometime.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
really would like that. I
Yeah. Next
really
time you're at
would.
Andrews, let me know. We'll go out to eat.
Okay, for sure, sure. I just
Yeah.
find that whole place depressing.
Oh,
Michigan is depressing to me. I've never gone to Michigan without getting depressed. But anyway, bye-bye.
okay. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye. Yeah.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
that was interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I can, you're right, Jim. It's a hermeneutical problem,
It
really.
is.
Not even an exegetical one. It's hermeneutical. It's how do you regard the Bible?
That's
And I
right.
think a lot of us have come to the conclusion that the Bible is reliable on matters of spirituality, but not necessarily on matter. And what I often say is, so do you stick to the Bible in matters of healing? You only pray. You won't use medications.
Yeah.
You stick to the Bible in matter of evangelism. You only walk around and talk to people on hillsides. You won't use radio, television, the internet. I mean, this is, I don't know. I'll let Jack Kane take it from there. He's smarter than me. Hey, Jack.
Hi, Jim. Thank you.
Hi, Jack.
It was a lovely exploration into this important man in Adventist history, and I appreciate the way you presented it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, you know, the, I guess the whole issue is not the history of the world. I think that's been cleared up. There's no debate over the age of the Earth. I mean, you can debate whether it's 13.8 or 13.7 billion from a Big Bang, and you can date if the moon and the Earth came together at the same time. I mean, there are things we can debate, but the long age is no longer debatable. So I
Yep.
think it is entirely a theological problem. And my plea, and I'm asking you if you can feel with me, is not that we don't need to send more scientists after this. We need to send more theologians. It's
You're
Lawrence
absolutely.
Siebold that needs to solve this problem, not Dr. Hayward or even medical Dr. Hain.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right, Jack. It is a theological problem, and theologians need to get on it. But I was talking to a friend from Andrews, or another retired friend, the other day in Sabbath school, and there was some issue that came up, and he said, let's see if I can put it right, something like, "We are sick theologically, but we don't want a cure in the church." And I think he put it well. There's a great deal of fear that, if we address these issues, we're going to get thrown out of our jobs or get thrown out of the church, whatever. And but we need some people who are willing to stand up and say, "Listen, this is the way it is." I mean, we do have some people like that, but they're usually retired or they are working outside the church. That's good that those people exist. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a theological issue.
And the fact is, there are millions of scientists who are believers in Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
And we need to listen to them and talk to them and
Yep.
find out how you do this.
That's right.
That's all I'll say. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Yeah, I know your brother Ted, by the way. He showed.
Ted's pretty good at geology.
He is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. No, you're right. It's a theological problem. And Jim, it's not just those who, it's not that some of these people don't want to speak.
Yeah.
They would seriously lose their chance. I've often talked to pastors who've said, if I speak up about the truth about some of these biblical or theological problems, I lose my chance to minister to people about the gospel of Jesus Christ.
That's right.
And I think that's a legitimate fear.
Mhm.
Ed Reifsnyder, let me bring you into the conversation here. There you go.
Hi, Ed.
Hi, thank you, Jim, for your fascinating presentation, in which you pulled no punches. I was hoping Cliff was going to stay on because I wanted to say an old saying I heard that the strength of conviction is not evidence of reality.
Right.
And
That's true.
clearly, Cliff has strength of conviction. And we weren't even talking about evolution so much as we were geology.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, there's a difference. Yeah.
yeah, right. I following up on what Lauren said, I think it's about inspiration,
Yeah.
the nature of inspiration, and ever since the Chicago statement on that subject, I feel like within Adventism we fluctuate around on what the human element is versus, infallibility and that sort of thing. I personally think that humans made significant contributions to what the Bible says. But I really wanted to turn the question back on you. Your last question at the end of your presentation was, what are the implications of Price's story for the church today? I think that's a fascinating question, and I'll bet you have a perspective on it.
Well, yeah, I do. Yeah, Price, like I said, he kind of shot from the hip. And he could have saved himself a lot of problems if he had just been a little more hesitant in what he said, but he wasn't. He was very sure of himself, and I think we need to be less sure of ourselves when we deal with these issues. There's a lot of stuff information we just don't get. I'm a firm believer in God as creator and all this, but also I can't deny physical evidence. Remember, there was a story. Terry Amott has written a biography of a history of biology of Walla Walla College, where I attended, and there's a story in there about I think it's Lemuel Esteb, who told one of his fellow pastors, he said, "You see that black hat over there? If Ellen White said that hat was white, it would be white to me." Now that is absolutely absurd. We can't just go around and think that our particular view of Scripture is the only possible way to interpret Scripture. You're right. Scripture has a very large human element, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make it less interesting. It doesn't make it less valuable for us today, but we just need to recognize that fact. So Price didn't do that. He thought his view was the only way to look at it. I think we need to treat one another with sort of kid gloves. I would love to talk to Cliff Goldstein. I mean, I think he's very sincere. I don't doubt his sincerity at all. Price, however, alienated. None of his 3 children remained in the Adventist church, which may tell you something. His brother, Charlie, never joined the Adventist church, but lived as an Adventist his whole life. Charlie was friends with the Ballinger brothers, who were, of course, great heretics within the Adventist church. They had questions about the sanctuary doctrine and things like this. And so he and George, his brother, used to write back and forth these long letters. And I have some of those. They're just on and on and on. And finally, George McCready Price got so angry with his brother and called him names, like he called him a parasite on the church and things like that, that Charlie said, look, I can't deal with this anymore. We're just going to have to quit talking about it. In fact, they quit talking, period, I think. And so they never really continued any discussion about these issues. Well, that's kind of unfortunate, where you can't even talk to your brother about something because you disagree with him over these issues. It's very interesting to me that Charlie's children remained Adventists, and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. We didn't see that. None of George's grandchildren, none of his children actually remained Adventists. In fact, they're actually members of the Baha'i faith, a large number of them. And they're very good people. I've become acquainted with them, and they're just delightful people. But Adventism didn't stick with them. And it may be because of good reason, because Price was so difficult to deal with. Yeah, I don't know, Ed, if that's a good response or not. I've been kind of rambling here.
Yeah, I just feel like we need a little humility
Yeah,
about what we hold dear.
yep,
And, we could discuss that for a long time, whether that means lack of faith or whatever, but I just feel like we need some humility.
yep. You're right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. I'm going to invite my friend Paul Priest to join the conversation. I've very much appreciated Paul through the years and his thinking about science. He has struggled a great deal to have a deeper understanding of it. Paul, go ahead.
Well, I'm still struggling.
Yes. Join the club.
The other day, actually, it was some time ago, I was studying the 144,000. I came across this text, Revelation 14:5, that no lie will be found in their mouths. And the thought came across my mind with respect to this dichotomy between evolution and Adventist creation view. I believe that God created nature and scriptures, God's revelation, they have the same author. They must agree. they don't. And the idea of an old Earth and a young Earth being simultaneously true at the same time, I can't buy. They're mutually exclusive. Uh, the same is true with respect to a special creation and evolution. I'm an evolutionist. It was a painful transition from a young Earth creationist that I used to be to what I am today. But the science, I have been over and over and over it, and I cannot reject it. The number 2 human chromosome has been found to have 4 telomeres and 2 centromeres. Telomeres, one at each end, a beginning and an end. 2 telomeres in the center that are mutated and are non-functional. The 2 centromeres, one is non-functional. And the fact that that genome is about what, 95 or more percent identical to the chimpanzee's chromosome.
It's true.
That, to me, is pretty powerful evidence for the evolution of man. I know that in Adventist circles, well, basically, I'm a heretic in Adventist circles. That's the reality of it. But for me, the problem is that we have bought in to a 16th, 17th century view of creation, and we have not advanced ourselves as science has advanced. I don't know what it's going to take to make that change, but somehow we're going to have to make that change, because to be part of that 144,000, there isn't going to be any lie on our lips. We're going to have the truth on this issue. That's just my observation.
Interesting point. That's a really interesting observation. But I hear you about the evidence from genetics. Yeah, it's very compelling.
Yeah.
I don't know any other way
Paul
to interpret it.
wrote an article for Adventist Day years ago that has stuck with me, and I really appreciate it. I've used it over and over again, Paul, and I appreciate it. He said, we always say that nature is God's second book. Why would God tell us the truth in the Bible and lie to us in nature?
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
that idea of lying to us in nature has been very powerful to me, and I deeply appreciate it. And I appreciate Paul teaching me that lesson.
I'll have to look for that article. I'd like to read that. Yeah.
I will look for it and I will find it.
Yeah.
My lovely cousin Tanya is on here. And I think one of your students from the past, Jim.
Ah,
Yes. Hi, Dr. Hayward. So,
hi.
1993, I was in Foundations of Biology at Andrews University.
Union. No, wait a minute. 19 what?
93.
Oh, 93.
Probably would
Yeah,
have
that
been,
would be here. Yes.
yes.
It's good to see you
And
again. I remember the name now. Yeah.
yes, and it was at the time in which the course was being kind of taught by 3 professors at once,
Yes.
which was a
Yes.
really interesting concept. I just want to say that I think I saw Dr. Chobatar on the call, who was my microbiology professor.
Ah,
Same.
yes. Good.
And so just the way that Andrews fostered my love of science, I'm really grateful for that. But I want to share a memory from your class. You were giving a lecture on the fossil record, and not about this particular figure in this story of the fossil record, but the science behind it and some of your travels and things you had seen. And when we got to the discussion, one of the students, this brought up many questions, and one of the students asked, "So do you believe in evolution?" And you kind of hesitated, and we were all kind of, well, what's he going to say to this?
I was going to
And,
say, what
and
did
the
I
response,
say?
you said, "I believe in the fossil record," basically. And I'm not sure if you even used the word belief so much as saying that you based your views on your understanding of the fossil record and that your background was paleontology. So you were very matter of fact about it, but in a, so it was very interesting kind of pause. And the very next day, the other professor came in with a handout that was the points counter to that of young earth creationism and the ways that
Interesting.
that was another point of view, as it were, even though you never really talked much about the Big Bang or anything like that. You really looked at the fossil record. Yeah. But yes, so it was pretty clear to me, and I didn't really speak about it very much with my peers. Sort of that was illuminating and confirmed certain ideas that I had already been suggested to me, but I had not really fully studied.
Hmm.
And it was really a pivotal, at least for me, kind of shift in how I thought about science moving forward. And I also, it's kind of a question I always had was sort of how did you navigate that as a teacher and as a professor, that kind of line between that sort of, theology that comes through the 19th century and
That's
then
right.
the more contemporary science. So that is one question that I have. I just want to throw out there that I ended up studying 19th century anti-Catholicism. I can't imagine why that would be of interest to me,
Fantastic.
but I just found myself in these historical rabbit holes that, like your talk today, I wondered also if that is in any published format or if you're intending on publishing that.
Oh, thank you, Tanya. It's so nice to see you again. And I don't remember that episode in Foundations of Biology, but I'm not surprised that it might have happened. Yeah, how did I navigate that? I always felt like my first obligation was sort of pastoral in class, and but also to be honest. And so I tried to pull those two things together. And, I probably didn't do that well sometimes, and other times, hopefully, it did work. But sometimes I used to start my classes and say, the things I'm going to tell you, a lot of what I'm going to say is probably going to be shown false in a few years. It may be just simply a lie at this point, but I don't know what those things are. And science just moves on, and we keeps expanding our views. I taught a course called Issues and Origins of Speciation for graduate students for quite a few years. There we dealt directly with these issues. And I used to start the class by telling them, I certainly don't have all the answers or many answers, and but I'm not going to lie to you. So what we did is we looked at all the different variety of different explanations for these things, and I let the students make up their minds. I didn't feel like it was my role to, decide what they should believe. I don't think that's a teacher's role anyway. A teacher's role is to try to get them thinking, and that's what I tried to do. And we had everything from mainland Chinese students who didn't even know what Christianity was, all the way to fundamentalists, Adventists, and non-Adventists in that class. And, I think it worked over the long haul because we were honest with one another, and we always ended up the class smiling. And I think that's an important thing to do. So I think that's what we need to do with each other, is just recognize, like Cliff, he's got reasons for why he believes the way he does. And, I'd like to explore that with him sometime over a meal and just get to know him better because I think that's important. Yeah, but that's very good. Your second question, Tanya, what was that? I can't remember.
I'm
Tanya,
trying to
There you
unmute.
go.
Sorry,
there you
Lauren.
are.
My other question had to do with the work you were presenting today. Is this
Oh, is it published?
available in a?
It's going to be. I'm just finishing a book on Price, and so that will be
Oh,
hopefully out. We'll see.
well, that's
I
exciting.
haven't.
Wonderful. I'll look for
Yeah,
that.
I don't have I haven't made a proposal yet to a publisher, but I suspect it'll be published. Yeah. So just keep your eyes open for that, and you can always email me hayward@andrews.edu. Still the same as when you were a student. So yeah. So I'll be
Uh,
happy to let you know when it comes out.
Frank, I just realized today, or a few days ago, that I know a whole bunch of Spanglers. And I think I kind of had you and Russ in the same, just sort of, I mean, Spangler is
We're
sort of one of
brothers.
those names. It's sort of memorable. But I apologize. I just realized that you guys are brothers, not the same
Yes,
person.
right.
Frank, go ahead.
Hi,
Thank
Frank.
you.
I
Hi.
remember you from Andrews area days. Yeah.
Yes, I came into your classroom several times with a video camera, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Good to see you again.
Yes. Thank you so much for your presentation. I've always had a little bit of a fascination about Price, and happy to hear that you're working on a book. I'll pick that up. I appreciated your last book that you did. I read that
Oh,
as well.
thank you. Thank you.
Yes, my question is, you've kind of answered it when you answered Tanya's question was, um, when I was doing undergrad at our Adventist Bible College here in Canada,
Hmm.
we of course studied flood
Hmm.
geology, but the teachers, the professors handled it with balance,
Yes.
even though plate tectonics and continental drift was just kind of starting to be whispered about. They handled it with balance, and I'm just wondering what the situation is today in our universities. Are they still teaching flood geology? Are they giving it with balance? How did you handle it? That was my question.
Yeah. Good question, Frank. You know, I can't tell you what other universities are doing really, except that I know that some Adventist teachers continue to deal with the flood story and talk about the flood as the interpretive framework for the geological column. I think there are others that I know who struggle with how to deal with this in an honest way with students, knowing the information they know about continental drift and plate tectonics and all this sort of thing. Since the time of plate tectonics, I mean, well, even the conservative creationists within Adventism that I am aware of accept plate tectonics today. But they want to have the plates moving around at huge speeds, which doesn't work geophysically. If you were to move, as one person said, the plates at what was it, 2 some odd feet per hour, the heat release from that movement would be so great that all the oceans would evaporate away. There would be huge problems with that. I mean, everything would be destroyed. It just doesn't work. And yet, the evidence is so strong for plate tectonics that it can't be denied by these folks. So I think they're still searching for an answer, as you know, we all are to a certain degree. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how to answer it for other teachers except that, yeah, I know there's quite a bit of diversity, let's just say, in the science area in our Adventist schools. Quite a bit of diversity.
Yeah.
Good to
Good
see you
question,
again.
Frank.
Good to
Thank
see
you.
you again.
Which leads me to ask this question that I had jotted down on my pad here. Uh, how do creationists deal with the spread of species around the globe? I've often wondered. Somebody made a joke one day that, well, the Noah stopped off at Australia and said, "Okay, all the marsupials off here," and then moved on to Africa and said, "Okay, all the savanna animals get off here." I mean, I've never really understood how that worked.
Well, biogeography is one of the most important areas, and it really hasn't received a lot of attention by creationists because it is such a problematic area. Frank Marsh and Price both thought that the redistribution of animals from the ark was miraculous. And in one case, I'm trying to think who it was now, thought that, well, okay, the kangaroos got off the ark, and it took them a while to get back, and it wasn't that generation, but it was multiple generations that finally got back to Australia where they originated. The problems are, of course, enormous with that kind of thinking. One of them is that living in fossil kangaroos are found in Australia. So the fossils are also, it boggles the mind. And why would God have, anyway, I can't even go there. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
But
it
yeah,
strains credulity.
the
really does.
biogeographic picture is absolutely crucial. And this is what Alfred Russel Wallace and Charles Darwin were both, they were both highly influenced by biogeography in terms of their theories of evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, Denis Fortin turned me onto a book that I've just finished recently called Impossible Monsters. Do you know that one?
Yes. Yes, I've heard that book.
It was absolutely fascinating to see how it was geology and paleontology that probably drove the rethinking of not just those disciplines, but theology in general
Yes.
was greatly influenced by that. Well, now we have one of my favorite theologians, Bob Johnston.
Yes.
Bob, I think I've unmuted you. There, go ahead.
Yeah,
Member of my Sabbath school class. Yes.
yeah. Somebody who's approached this from the hermeneutical end is John Walton, a professor
Yes.
at Wheaton College. He wrote The World of Genesis 1 and some subsequent books. Have you read any of those? And what do you
Yes.
think of his approach?
Well, he talks about the creation account as a temple, in terms of a temple exegesis or something. I don't quite understand all the details, but it's sort of like a recapitulation of the temple construction. Is that what I'm understanding? And, it's very creative, and I think he's not the only one that takes that particular position. If that works for people to try to understand the Genesis account from that perspective, that's fine. I don't know enough about ancient history of the Middle East to be able to critique that view. But you do, Bob. What do you think?
It's been a while since I read his book, but if I remember right, he's saying that you have to enter their world to understand their language.
Yes.
And when you try to transition it to another world or another, you misinterpret them.
Yes.
So it's not only a question of
not dealing with the science, frankly, but it's a problem of dealing with the scripture and the ancient Near Eastern thought, ancient Near Eastern world incorrectly. It's as if you take a book that's been written in German and try to interpret it as if it were written in English. It's been a while since I read his book, but I found it quite helpful.
Well, it's very similar to Brian Bowl and Fritz Guy's books on this topic, which are excellent. They've written on the flood and the creation and the fact that we really misinterpret the words used in Genesis. I don't know Hebrew, but they do. Certainly Fritz Guy knew Hebrew, and I think there are creative ways to think about the Old Testament, and I think John Walton was one of those. He came to Andrews and spoke. You probably heard him when he came a few years ago.
No, I don't remember that. I didn't know he did that.
Yeah, he spoke in the physics amphitheater. It was really interesting. He got hammered by one of our people who didn't like what he said, but yeah.
Well, it's sort of like if somebody grows up with a Mercator projection and learns geography from that, and then interprets the geography of the world as if it were a globe,
right?
You would not be reading the Mercator projection correctly.
That's right.
You have to deal with the language as it is, and not try to transform what is written in one language into another.
Science was not part of their framework back then. They were, science didn't arise until the last 200 years or so. So the kinds of questions that we ask are inappropriate to ask Scripture. Exactly.
Thank you.
I agree. Thank you, Bob.
Oh, thanks, Bob. Thanks very much. Let's see. Those of you who want to speak, I just want to give you a little reminder here. We're down to the last 15 minutes. Sometimes folks raise their hands like 2 minutes before the end. Don't do that. Come on now and ask your question. If not, we'll let Jim go and have an early supper.
Well, George Tichy's been had his hand raised for quite a while here.
Yeah, I've got George here.
Okay.
George, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Just a reminder to you, I was not your student.
Yes.
Didn't have this opportunity, but we graduated in college at the same year, different colleges, different places, in 1972. So we are kind of the same generation there.
Yeah.
I need to congratulate you first for having been able to survive to the end of your career in biology and correlated studies on paleontology and all that stuff. And you kept working until the end and didn't have major problems, I guess, with the denominational approach, which is unusual. Okay, so congratulations for that. Thanks for your presentation. It shows that the dangers of people who decide to be absolutely right about everything, like George Price, how embarrassing it is, I would say, because science was not advanced enough in his day, so he took advantage of it and became a very, absolute guy. I have the truth. This is it. And there was no room for much discussion. Man, this is a dangerous approach. And unfortunately, nowadays, we still have people like this. You see, fundamentalist that tells you that no matter what science discovers, it's not right unless and then comes their beliefs. So this is a great lesson, because I believe that one of the things that is missing and has always been missing in Adventism is flexibility, humility, acceptance, and respect. I mean, we may not agree, not the two of us, but two people may not agree. Right. Okay, one states what they believe, the other states what they believe. End of conversation. Don't have to start, trying to convert others and all that. Because sooner or later, someone will be wrong and will be embarrassed, maybe 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And for me, as science, that was always my position, as science unveils facts in nature, for me, this takes precedence over, I feel, I believe, I was told, I was shown, this I was shown thing, And so I think that your presentation was very important in this sense, that brought up this reality that when people become absolutists and, they possess the truth, final truth, well, this is very dangerous. We have to really avoid this. I don't know if you agree with me, but I hope so.
I completely agree with you, George. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Yeah, you better.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I've been rolling around your and Jack Haynes' idea that we need hermeneuticists, not scientists, to solve this problem with the conflict. I was reminded of an N.T. Wright quote. I don't know if you ever heard this one. He said, right now, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close. He said, right now we're using 19th century questions or answer. We're giving 19th century answers to 16th century questions. We need to give 21st century answers to first century questions.
Yes.
I thought that was brilliant.
That's very good. I like that. Very, very good.
Yeah. If you want to remember it, it is, I did post on the Adventist Today website because I thought it was so very good.
Which book, which of N.T. Wright's books is that? Do you remember?
I'm not sure. Not sure.
Okay.
I believe when I tried to search out where it came from, I believe somebody said it actually came from one of his lectures, and that he repeats it frequently. That it's kind of one of his buzz phrases that he uses over and over again.
That's a good one.
Yes, it really is. One of my favorite people, Michael Schofield, who always challenges me. Michael, let me see. You gotta open your microphone here. There you go.
There you go.
You ask the literalists, the biblical literalists, how they can be that way if we don't have any original manuscripts. They tend to be ignorant of the many stages of copying and translating and redacting that has gone on through Christian history. With regard to, George, to absolutism, that comes from the doctrine that I have to be right to be saved. And that has permeated Adventism since its history. I have to, the doctrines, I have to believe them to be saved. And that's crippling. That's all I got to say.
Michael, I just want to say that you gave a Sabbath school class at Sligo here recently, which I really enjoyed. Thank you so much for that. It was outstanding.
Thank you.
Appreciated that.
It is a problem. I can't tell you how many times as a pastor I would hear people say, well, my son doesn't come to church, but you know what? I know he still believes in the Sabbath. And that kind of thinking, that somehow saying, I believe in this, is somehow salvific. It is a problem for Seventh-day Adventists, I believe. Jim, this was marvelous.